Hi, this is my review of Demon Gate: The Companion. This is a companion sourcebook for the Demon Gate role-playing game. This adds a lot of things. New material. You have character classes, you have fiction, you have several expanded and optional rules, as well as some clarifications. New character abilities, body augmentations, that is prosthetics, traits, and a life path system to generate characters. It even includes a mini campaign, so there's a lot of stuff here. Now let's talk about the quality of the PDF. I have two criticisms. Well, this could be a nitpick, but it's the cover. I've already seen this image, and I think it's slightly generic when compared to the other illustrations in Demon Gate. Generally, I prefer original illustrations for the covers of the different expansions, source books, etc. I don't think it was too much of an issue in Tortured South, because in that image I did see that the image was used in the core rulebook, but it fit the source book so well. But with the companion, I think that this image is just too generic to what this expansion represents. My other criticism is that there are quite a few typos throughout the entire book. They don't present an obstacle in understanding the rules, the fiction, but it's still somewhat of a contrast compared with the excellence of what is contained in this book. That is, when it comes to the rules, the content itself, the fiction. So those are my criticisms when it comes to the quality, but everything else is great. You have the Demon Gate graphic design throughout all of the pages. That is, it looks kind of like a dark grimoire of sorts. Everything is well written and explained and organized. You have hyperlinks. You have a complete index that takes you to any rule that you are looking for, any section. You also have bookmarks. You have a table of contents. So it's very easy to navigate the entire PDF, and the illustrations are also great. They combine old school with new school. You have some black and white illustrations that are more in the old school style, and then you have some more modern looking fantasy illustrations, and they all fit the theme quite well. So overall, the quality is good despite those couple of criticisms that I mentioned. Now let's talk about the content. The book starts with a bit of fiction. I won't be giving spoilers so that you can enjoy these different stories, but the first fiction that we encounter sets the tone of gloom and doom for Demon Gate. This is an apocalyptic fantasy role-playing game. This is very dark, and it sets a theme of lost hope, of awful things to come, while giving you an outlook of the political situation and on the spiritual and supernatural dangers that lie ahead. You also have an introduction from the author Brandon Williams, telling you about this book, but also things to come, and it sounds really exciting. There's a lot of potential when it comes to Demon Gate. Maybe it's because Demon Gate has a lot to do with other dimensions, even the realm of the dead, that there is a lot of complexity, a lot of depth overall, both in theme and potentially in rules, that you can expect many good things to come. There's even some notion that the science fantasy aspect is going to be enhanced a bit, potentially with future source books. But even with this companion book, with the addition of prosthetics, you see a technological edge being made more apparent in the Demon Gate world. So it's great that the player characters can take advantage of that, but it can also represent a potential threat. They are not going to be the only ones using these technological advantages. Next, we have some comments on character creation. With the core rulebook, you have a complete system to create your character. However, here you have a random way to determine many things about your character. This is optional, of course, but I think that the life path system presented in this companion really enhances the role-playing possibilities of your character. It feels more alive. So you have a few different methods that also give you a difficulty when playing in Demon Gate. You have the easy mode character creation method. You have a lot of points to spend to create the exact character that you want. I think this easy mode method is great for high-powered campaigns. You're going to create some truly legendary characters with easy mode. You also have normal mode. you have an arrangement of different numbers and apply them however you like for an average or normal character. But then you have hard mode. In this mode, you roll 4d6 and drop the lowest. So this can have some swingy results. Sometimes you end up with a good character, but other times your character is a bit down on his or her luck. So this is a really gritty way to start out playing in Demon Gate. And then you also have Hell mode, Born into this world. This is about the life path character creation method. For this method, you're going to need to roll a d100 or two 10-sided dice to determine many things about your character. Let's take a look at the different steps and aspects of this character generation method. First, you determine your random race. You roll on a table, and you could end up with a bug roll, or maybe an Eldrin, a Goblin, a Minotaur, a Mongrel, a Skog. Remember that in Demon Gate you have some very unusual fantasy species and races, and even if your character does not belong to the mutant type of character, you can also gain some mutations through these rolls. Then we move on to the birthplace of your character. Your character perhaps was born in a civilized setting, or in a rural environment, or in the wilderness, and this is going to give you different bonuses. Like, for example, if you were born in a civilized place, you're going to get a bonus in perception, in intelligence. But if you were born in a rural area, you are going to get a bonus to your body, to your dexterity. If you were born into the wilderness, you can get a bonus to strength and to your body attribute. So it makes sense, because people in some civilized areas have access to a lot of knowledge, but people in more rural or wilderness type of environments, they're going to depend more on their instinct and their body. Then we have the Astrological Sign and the Fates section. You roll to get a sort of zodiac sign for your character. Maybe you were born under the Frostfall. This gives you night vision around the months of Frostfall. Or maybe you were born under Deadwood. This gives you the Serpent Step. During the months surrounding Deadwood, all stealth checks gain a bonus. Or maybe you were born under the Thorn. This gives you Lifeblood. Drinking from the water skin grants additional hit points twice per day in the months surrounding the Thorn. Or maybe you were born under the Reaping, and you get Death Throes as a power. During the months surrounding Reaping, the character gains a bonus to their spiritual influence checks if making a save versus death. Following that, you determine your parents, and remember, this is all determined by rolling a d100. So when it comes to parents, maybe your parents are both alive, or maybe one is alive and the other died. Maybe you are an orphan, or maybe both of your parents were killed, or maybe they died from a disease. Next, we have a step detailing your siblings. Do you have one sibling, two siblings, or maybe you have even 4 siblings, or maybe you do not know if you have siblings or brothers or sisters at all. You also have a table to determine the fate of any non-player character, that is your parents, your siblings, but I think this table is also quite useful if you want to determine the fate of any non-player character that the characters know about during an adventure or a campaign. So maybe a non-player character ended up in prison, maybe that character was a casualty of war, maybe that character died because of sickness, or maybe that character was murdered, or there was some sort of monster that killed the character. There could be so many outcomes. You also have a step that determines the bloodline. This table is used to determine the status of your bloodline, or who raised you as you started to grow up. So maybe your character started being a serf, or maybe your character was a pirate, maybe that character belonged to some sort of tribe, or your character was in the military, or maybe your character was a cultist. And each of these different bloodlines or bloodline backgrounds gives you some advantages. Like, for example, your character was a scholar, you're going to get a bonus to your intelligence, and you're going to get a bonus when it comes to scholarly skills. Or if your character was a warrior from the very start, you're going to get a bonus to your physical attributes. After that, you have step determining your training. This is about what you learned while being a teenager. Maybe your character was always a lone wolf, so you get a bonus to an attribute of your choice because of your determination. Or maybe your character started out being a criminal, so you get a bonus to a physical attribute but you also get a frenzy to your frenzy pool. Maybe your character joined a guild from a very young age and you start out with more money and a bonus of reputation points. Or maybe you traveled with a caravan for a long time and you ended up with a bonus when it comes to your trade skills, diplomatic skills, and any other skill set related to traveling or moving around with a caravan. Next, you have a step determining events. These are random events that could have happened thus far in your life. So maybe a family member or friend that was close to you died and you inherited a special item from them. Maybe your character had a near-death experience. So maybe you have a flaw. Maybe you suffered from some physical or psychological wound. Maybe you are tormented. Or maybe you suffered a wound in your eye. Maybe your character was a victim of treachery. So now you have a conflictive or antagonistic relationship with a specific non-player character. Or maybe your character owes money to someone, so you have a penalty when it comes to your reputation. Maybe your character has the gift of knowledge, so you get a free skill slot in diplomacy, in magical or creative endeavors, in survival or trade. Or maybe your character is addicted to something, so you need to indulge in your addiction every now and then. Or maybe your character has discovered a recent mutation in his or her body, and this could be a debilitating or an advantageous mutation. There are so many results for all of these tables. I'm just giving you a small sample of what you can get. You even have a severity table to determine severity in anything, in sicknesses, perhaps related to some sort of wound or other situation. So you make your roll, and the severity could be mild, moderate, strong, severe. You also have a contingency percentage to figure out if the character is having an episode at that current moment during the game. Maybe it's some sort of phobia or trauma. You also have a step detailing affiliates. These are non-player characters that serve as allies for your player character. Each player character has two non-player characters that are allies or work as characters that he or she has known in their life, in their past, or maybe just recently. And if they are charismatic enough, they can gain another non-player character to act as an ally. And depending on the bond or relationship that is also determined by making a roll, you can get a token. These are basically objects that are not too valuable. They are useful, so you can sell them or you can use them in adventures. But basically these are objects that you have obtained in the relationship or the alliance with that non-player character. You can determine the conditions of the type of bond with the non-player character ally. However, when it comes to your allies, there are some conditions. That is, the situation can get complicated. There could be a weakness or a vulnerability, and this can act as a negative modifier or a positive modifier depending on the situation. So for example, maybe an enemy, he's threatening your ally or using that ally as a sort of bargaining chip. So this could add a negative modifier in any interaction in that type of situation. But what if it's somewhat more positive? What if you are protecting the city or the town or some place that is related to the non-player character ally? You're going to get a bonus because of that bond, that emotional tie to that non-player character. So depending on how strong or vulnerable that bond is, you can get a greater or lesser penalty or modifier, positive modifier. You have a table to determine the occupation of your ally and what type of token that ally could give to you, or what sort of object you could find in your interaction with that non-player character. So for example, maybe you know an alchemist and he could give you a healing salve. Or maybe you know an armorer and you get some leather bracers, maybe as a gift. Maybe you know a mage and in your journeys you found a book. What is that book about? Maybe you know a ranger and you end up with the tinderbox. Maybe you asked the ranger for the tinderbox and you forgot to return it, so now you have it. So as you can see, all of these relationships, the professions of your allies, and the types of tokens that you can obtain serve as fuel for some role-playing moments. You can also determine many things for that non-player character, that is the gender, the affiliation, and you also have a table that is going to be useful for any sort of situation related to a non-player character or generating a non-player character on the fly. Because you already have a non-player character creator in the core rulebook of Demon Gate, But with this non-player character table, you can determine the gender, the affiliation, that is, if that non-player character is an ally or an enemy. Also the bond, maybe it's just an acquaintance, or maybe it's a very close ally. Maybe your ally or enemy is an adult, or an elder, or an adolescent. You can also determine the ally disposition. Maybe you have a cordial relationship. Maybe you have a goodwill relationship towards each other. You can also determine the enemy disposition. Maybe your enemy wants you dead. Or maybe that enemy just holds you in contempt. Or maybe there is a respectful spite between the two of you. Now, there is a very important step in this life path generation process. Do you want to begin adventuring after creating your character, or do you wish to continue training? You can age your character. You can let some years go by and obtain more levels in the particular class that you are training. So you can start with a character that is more powerful, skilled, and resourceful, but also older. You also have tips and advice on how to start with a character at level 4. If you want to start as level 4 straight away, with no more particular details on the life path process, without aging your character and such, you can do this with these tips and advice. Although I would only recommend that if you are playing some high-powered campaign, because you're going to start with more power and resources, like I told you. But here you have all the details, and if you want to use the life path creation method, as explained in this book, you have the details on how to continue training to level up, with well-organized information on how to calculate enough saga points to make it to the next level, how to gain gift rolls for leveling, gain character class abilities, etc. After all of this, you have the mutation table. Maybe this mutation was obtained on purpose as you are generating your character. Maybe you follow the procedure to make your choices instead of randomly determining everything about your character. Or maybe the mutations here resulted from a random result in the life path process. Each mutation has 5 stages. 5 complete stages that give you a greater advantage or positive modifier or special abilities depending on the mutation. But if it's a mutation that also has some negative things, this will also advance or move forward as you are mutating in a greater degree. So you have the method of mutation. Maybe your mutation resulted from some sort of alchemical experiment, or maybe it's the effect of some sorcery, or maybe it has to do with evolution. Maybe it's just part of who your character is. So you have mutation effects, like for example you have anathema. You are hard to look at, suffering a penalty to physical beauty, but at the same time, related to the amount of physical beauty that you lost, you will also gain the same result in the body attribute. So if you want a hulking, ugly, but very strong character, this is a good mutation for that. And if you get it as a random result, well, now you know what you are going to be role-playing as. And as you move up on the stages, your character is going to become more bestial, more monstrous, dealing heavy damage with bare hands, and you could even emit a powerful roar. Or maybe your character is amphibian, or maybe that character is elemental, maybe your character is a wretch, or maybe your character is necrotic. The mutant looks like a rotting corpse, and in later stages you can produce a curse of rot upon your enemies. You can even emit rot breath. But as you can imagine, it's going to be very difficult for you to enter cities and towns without people looking at you suspiciously. Maybe it's a good idea to wear a mask and robe your body completely so that they do not see your undead appearance. Maybe your character is a dryad. That is, these mutants are given special physical advantages of great strength and toughness as their epidermis begins to severely harden and their eyes and veins turn green. So you could entangle your enemies. You could speak with the forest and even carry out photosynthesis. Maybe your mutation is of a psionic nature. Maybe your mutation is related to shifting. That is, for some strange reason, you can produce some mimicking and camouflaging effects. And later on you can even shapeshift completely. Maybe your character has some sort of arachnid traits. That is, you could begin with 8 legs in total and you have a lower body quite like a spider body. Maybe you are a conduit, that is, you are mutated internally to be a living beacon for wayward souls, and you often have terrible scars or scorch marks all over your body. because of possession. So you want a character with stigma and such, this is a good mutation for that. You can also get some pretty gross things, like for example, maybe your body is also the hive, that is, your body mutated into a living domicile for insects. But of course, you could also use these insects as hive soldiers and salvagers. Maybe your mutation makes you look like a reptile, or maybe you look like a giant mantis. So as you can see, there are many mutations. Some of them give you some natural weapons and natural protection like exoskeleton. So this is just a small sample. And I think they also serve as inspiration for you to come up with your own mutations. After that, we have information on diseases and plague. To determine the severity of the disease, like I told you before, you have different stages like mild, moderate, strong. But here you have specific details on the types of mental and physical conditions that could apply depending on the severity. You also have a plague table. Maybe it's the blood plague, or the demon plague, or the pale plague, with the causes. Maybe it's contaminated blood that caused the disease, or maybe it's through feces or magic. There's also information on the symptoms, the modifications, that is, maybe you have dementia and hallucinations, and you suffer a penalty to your perception and your willpower. Or maybe you are constantly vomiting and you have delusions and you have blurred vision, so you get a penalty to dexterity and your body attribute. And you also have information on the average life expectancy, so that's quite grim. You better cure your character of that plague immediately, or of the disease. You also have a large table containing many diseases like mud guts, necrosis, rock gut, the shivers, the smugs, arrow rot. With the form of transmission, maybe you obtain that disease because of something bad that you ate, or maybe the air is polluted, or maybe through a wound or a parasite. You also have information on how contagious the disease is, and the symptoms. Maybe the character has a fever, maybe he feels pebbles in the stomach and the urinary tract, maybe you have aching muscles, or maybe there is chest pain. And all of these are related to different modifications, penalties that you suffer to your strength, dexterity, body, perception, etc. Then we have a section featuring body replacement and modifications. This is all about prosthetics. In the core rulebook, we had some information about this, but just some vague guidelines. If you wanted to implement replacement for lost limbs and such, you needed to homebrew your own things. You had information on how different body modifications cost soul points, and humans usually have an advantage because they have a lot of soul points, so they are usually able to have more body modifications when compared to other species. However, you didn't have examples, specific examples of arms and legs and eyes that you could have, but here in the Demon Gate Companion you have many prosthetics. You have information on the cost of the enchantments or surgery to apply them. You also have information on the location, of course, what types of augmentations and prosthetics replace different parts in the body. You also have details on the maximum number of upgrades for a specific item or prosthetic. You also have information, of course, on how many soul points each of these pieces cost. You also have the different methods. Maybe it's a magical application of something or a mutation. There are prosthetics that are basically mutations put into the body of the one that lost the limb or wants to replace some part, but it could also be a mechanical modification. You also have information on the modifiers, of course, what attributes are going to be changed depending on the specific augmentation, and you also have the percentage of availability. How common is it to have this modification in a specific town or city, or if there's someone who knows how to apply these changes to someone's body, how common is it or how rare? And of course this relates also to the cost of the different augmentations. I'm just going to mention a few of them because there are a total of 20. So you have a crystal eye. It's a magical modification and it gives you a bonus to hit and damage. You also have a demon mark. This is basically placed on the head of the person. This is a mutation and it gives you a bonus to an attribute. You also have the draconian hide. This can be applied to the torso, giving you toughness and regenerative capabilities. You also have demon's claw to change your arm. This is also a mutation, giving you a bonus to strength and damage. You also have things such as the Iron Fist, the Mechanical Arm, the Leg, giving you a bonus to dexterity, to strength, movement. You also have a normal peg leg, but you also have prosthetics that are hollow and you can store things within them. And you also have weapon arms. Maybe you want to attach a gun weapon or some sort of blade to your arm or to your leg even. It could happen because these modifications can serve also as examples for you to come up with your own prosthetics. And you have background information and details concerning the application of any of these replacement parts. So you can better roleplay how the arm or the leg or your eye is going to be changed or modified. So for example, in the case of the Demon Claw, this is a painful mutation that is granted only by inserting the cursed bones into an incision made upon the hand. The mutation takes effect over a few hours and causes fierce pain as the mutation transforms the arm, stretching bone, muscles, and altering the physical form of the arm. You also have the Draconian Hide, another mutation dropped into deep cuts that are strategically placed on the body, yet only through the dermal layer. For some, these scars stay forever, yet with others, the regenerative properties of the mutation clear the webbed scars away. There's also the Iron Fist that I mentioned. Basically, by replacing a missing fist with an iron one, it's not a simple task, but when done properly, it becomes a nice tool to use. You also have the weapon arm. Usually, the loss of an arm near the elbow allows for many weapon types to be added. So you could add a dagger, or perhaps a gun, a mace, any sort of weapon that you can imagine can be attached to your arm. So it's great that they include all of these details so that you can better narrate or describe how your character is getting something attached to his or her own body. Next, we have a section featuring the new character classes. These belong to the commoner category. These character classes, in my opinion, are not as powerful or as resourceful as the ones included in the core rulebook. However, because they are commoner classes, they are more specialized in mundane tasks. That is, in the specific setting and situation, they can actually be more useful than the other character classes. I'm going to read some of the details here because they are quite extensive. First, we have the Emissary. Emissaries are the trusted agents of important people of powerful groups. The emissary will work for the leader of a merchant's guildhouse, usually. This does not have to be so. It could be for anyone or any group that represents money or power. It could be for a religious group. Their masters could range from as lowly as a slave trader in Aticrolis to a bishop of the order. If the game master and player wish it to be, the emissary could work for an even more powerful group, such as royalty, perhaps a jarl or a baroness, a king or a queen, or even the emperor. So you have character class abilities such as practice rhetoric, rally ally, last word, greased palms, diplomacy, seek counsel. Your primary attributes are charisma, intelligence, and perception. You have unarmed combat skills at a basic level. You also have character skills such as barter, concealment, listening, reading and writing, speech. You also have starting equipment such as a blackjack, a quill, a vial of ink. Now, I'm going to read some of these special abilities for the emissary. You have things such as practiced rhetoric. The emissary may spend frenzy to add a d6 to a charisma check for speech, barter, or deceive due to their practiced rhetoric in diplomatic affairs. You also have last word. This ability adds a die into the emissary's social pool permanently. The emissary may burn the usual frenzy during an argument or debate to gain the use of this d6 from their pool as normal. And you may even bump the die up a rank instead for this role. You also have things such as commanding voice. So the emissary can combine the leadership skill during a speech skill to gain a temporary non-player character follower who will agree with the emissary's cause and make this agreement known to those around them. You also have diplomacy. The world of diplomacy is as cutthroat as any bar, and emissaries must be aware. So you spend frenzy to add an additional d10 to any perception-related test involving seeing, listening, or hiding. You also have seek counsel. The emissary may use the skill of speech to add the result of the glory percentage of the reputation in order to gain counsel. Social dice may be added to this as well, but must be added first before a glory check is made. Then we have the merchant. And remember, these are just some of the abilities of the emissary. The merchant is a trader of goods. They specialize in dealing with others to buy and sell their wares, while at the same time trying to land great deals. They raise reputation well, all while they pursue their fortune. Merchants often try to stick to the laws of the lands that they travel to. Yet there are some who are too drawn to the promise of quick plunder who take up illegal transactions. You have character class abilities such as negotiate, discount, open trade, well met, apprentice, gimmick. Your primary attributes are charisma and intelligence. You have basic unarmed combat skills. You have character skills such as appraisal, barter, detect lies, deceive, read and write. You have starting equipment such as a satchel, a merchant scale, and you can choose 10 units of goods. Let me tell you about some of the abilities of the merchant. You can negotiate. This allows you to buy low and sell high. So you can burn frenzy to add a d6 to your social pool to any barter or deal being made. You also have appropriate funds. The merchant has stowed enough coins to know where people keep them. So for frenzy, the merchant may add an additional d6 to any looting check. In addition, they receive more percentage of the currency from whatever amount they find. You also have well connected. The merchant has connections all over, and once per week, for a saga point, they may roll their glory percentage with a bonus percentage per rating in this ability. This is used in order to possess a connection in the current city they are located. You also have well met. The merchant is able to add a d10 to their social pool for frenzy when first meeting someone, or when calling out for strangers to look upon their wares. And then you have apprentice. The merchant has taken on a hired hand of some sort to aid in their business venture. Then we have the prostitute. The ancient commoner profession of prostitution has been around since the beginning of mortals. All genders have taken part in this profession and used their talents to cause peace or destroy it. Some began as little as servants and used their talents just to get by in a cutthroat world of untrusty vagrants and blood money. However, this is a very dangerous line of work. Prostitutes are often mistreated, beaten, or worse, so they often seek out a guardian if they cannot protect themselves, or they join guilds and brothels. So you have character class abilities such as tricks of the trade, soften the mark, dark embrace, unsavory circles, and harem. You have primary attributes of charisma, dexterity, and perception. You have basic unarmed combat skills, and your character skills are concealment, dancing, deceive, seduction, and such. You have several pieces of starting equipment such as a bone knife, perfume, a belt pouch, a silk veil. Let me tell you about some of the abilities of the prostitute. So the prostitute can spend frenzy to add a d6 to any seduction or dancing roll. You also have soften the mark. This allows you to increase your steal, stealth, and concealment skills. There's also the dark embrace. People have their guard down when they are enthralled in passion. So if the prostitute attempts to attack someone during or post coitus and succeeds their skill checks, their attack automatically counts as a critical success with additional modifiers, or rather multipliers, of damage. This is quite lethal, so if you want a replacement for an assassin in a party, a prostitute is a good choice, as long as you know how to be seductive enough to get the prostitute close to her target. You also have streetwalker. Anytime the prostitute moves through the streets of a city, they may burn frenzy to add a d6 to any stealth or concealment skill checks. You also have harem. This is when the prostitute has a few friends who are half as skilled as her. So basically the prostitute rolls a charisma check, and if she is successful, she gains help from members of the harem. Then we have the slave. Slaves are often born into slavery, of course. This is not someone who started out doing something else and was later captured. This is someone who has been a slave all of his or her life. Many are forever doomed into a life of suffering under the rule of a slave master. Most that live to be adults are treated like beasts, being locked into cages and only let loose when they are needed. Yet, there are very few slaves that do not suffer vile treatments and live in luxury, with food, comfort, and safety. The Occult Empire is well known for their legalized slave trade, Some countries have abolished the ownership of mortal races, while many still possess slaves all over the country. So here you have class abilities such as Endless Toil, Scarred, Master's Brand, Trauma and Suffering, Bonds of the Bound. Your primary attributes are Dexterity and Perception. You have basic unarmed combat skills, and your character skills are Concealment, Endurance, Escape Artistry, Stealth, Running. You start out with some equipment, such as a wooden club, a sack, and a rope belt. Let me tell you about some of the abilities of the slave. Endless Toil. The slave may burn Frenzy before rolling to add a d6 to any roll related to physical labor. Then you have Scarred. The slave has been beaten relentlessly by their master or masters. However, they did not break, so you add a bonus to Toughness and Fortitude. You also have Plan of Escape. The slave becomes very skilled at anything related to escape artistry, stealth, or concealment. You also have Pent Up Rage. The slave is able to spend Frenzy in order to add a d6 to their strength damage modifier for an attack. You also have Bonds of the Bound. The slave has the power to grant an assist on any skill for an ally by spending Frenzy and adding a d6 to the ally's task. Now, what I like of all of these professions is that they are not only challenging but also highly useful or advantageous depending on how you use them. So for example, if you want to play as the Emissary, any sort of thing related to convincing someone, using demagoguery, trying to be persuasive about anything. It could be related to something, to a particular organization, or maybe some endeavor or quest that you are trying to undertake. The Emissary is great for that. And when it comes to the merchant, anything related with obtaining items and selling stuff is going to be very easy for the merchant. And when it comes to diplomatic matters, there's also some advantage to being a merchant, being well known, and knowing how to act so that people like you. And when it comes to the Prostitute, it's a great class to replace an assassin or a rogue in the party. You can use her to kill or to steal or to obtain information, but she also has quite the diplomatic advantage, depending on how seductive she is, how she employs her skills and knowledge. Now, when it comes to the slave, you're going to have a huge advantage in anything related to physical labor, being resistant, enduring all sorts of hardships. You're not going to be as skilled as the other more professional classes in the core rulebook. However, the slave works great with others as a support class and trying to escape from some place or getting into some place, and you do have decent damage potential when it comes to facing off against opponents. Next, we have a section detailing advanced combat rules. This is all about expanded and optional combat rules and also some clarifications. Some things modify existing abilities, some things add to your character's combat potential. So for example, when it comes to magic, you have a choice to modify magic, change the damage and the area of effect. You also have new details concerning blocking. You can even clash your weapon against your opponent's weapon in a very cinematic way. You know, when you're trying to shove your weapon into the face of your opponent and he's trying to do the same thing. So you make a roll on a table to get some different results. Maybe sparks fly and that's it. But maybe after that clash you lose the parry. You cannot parry for the rest of the round until your turn comes again. Or maybe you become staggered after that clash, so you have a penalty when it comes to attacking and defending because of that. Or maybe you drop your weapon, or maybe your weapon is damaged in the clash. You have information how to block with a weapon. That is, normally you use a shield to protect yourself, and it's more effective considering the size of the shield, but if you are dual wielding, a weapon can also be useful for this. However, you cannot block projectile weapons, of course, unless you have a very specific ability, a very extraordinary talent. There are also details concerning blunt weapons. They can bypass some of the protection provided by armor, to a certain degree, representing of how, for example, a warhammer could leave a dent or go almost through armor, and it will become quite painful for the one wearing that suit of armor. You also have information on burdens. They are just like an edge, but in a negative light. A burden is when you must roll your defense or your attack twice and take the lowest roll. You also have information on critical hits and bleeding damage. This is for edged weapons and piercing weapons. Unlike blunt weapons, they cannot leave that dent or almost penetrate armor, but if they manage to touch the skin, perhaps you attacked a weak area of the suit of armor, or you managed to get that cut in the face or the hands of your opponent. It depends on the situation, of course. You can describe it however you like, and you're going to inflict bleeding damage. And if you are using a bludgeoning weapon, you can actually inflict a knockout. So Demon Gate is truly one of the most realistic, within the fictional context, role-playing games out there. There's also details on corrosive damage and toxic damage. Corrosive basically burns through anything that it affects, and toxic damage has to do with poisoning, with affecting the organic body of any opponent. There are also details on debates, arguments, and negotiations, and someone with high charisma is going to have an advantage when doing this. There's also information on deflecting or parry. So when it comes to deflecting or parrying, there's going to be a chance to counterattack. That is, you suffer a penalty to your defensive action, but in the next attack you're going to get a bonus. There's also information on delayed actions. When you are in combat, there are certain instances where you may wish to hold your actions in order to act after the enemy. This is different from what was explained in the core rulebook. In the core rulebook, you can basically move your initiative down to another spot, but you can only act until it's your turn. And with delayed actions, you act outside of the normal initiative order, but you take a penalty when you carry out your action. There's also information on divine damage, how to make it more damaging or hurtful for undead opponents. You also have information on drawing 2 weapons in one action. This is quite flashy and it requires certain dexterity. You can do this, but you get an attack penalty under normal conditions. There's also more information on dual weapon fighting. Anyone is capable of doing this, but it's more convenient for you to specialize your character in that sort of fighting style. There are also details on edge, that is, a beneficial advantage to your attack. It is primarily used when rolling the d20 to attack or defend. You roll your d20 twice and you take the highest result. You also have information on fatigue points. You have subcategories if you wish to make things a bit more specific. You have mild physical fatigue and mild mental fatigue, and the serious physical fatigue or serious mental fatigue. So it depends on the sort of situation that is going on. If you are going through a succession of tough battles, it's going to be serious physical fatigue. But if you're just handling some sort of arduous task for a moment, it's going to be mild physical fatigue. When it comes to mental matters, maybe there is some sort of mind-bending puzzle, it could be mild mental fatigue. But what if you are studying a very dangerous grimoire that could make your character insane? That could inflict serious mental fatigue. You have information on focusing, concentrating, or aiming. So this is mostly about spending action points to get a better chance at scoring a hit, for example. There are also details on how to focus on defense, giving you a bonus in your defensive action. There's also information on fumble results. In the core rulebook there is already a table with many fumble results, but here you are presented with a new table that puts many more options. So, for example, during a fumble, maybe there is a comical mishap, so nothing happens, you continue the fight, you just look a bit ridiculous. But maybe you ended up with anxiety. You are worried for the next attack, maybe you miss, maybe you are actually struck, so you get a penalty to your actions, to your attack and defense. Or maybe you get your breath knocked out in some way, so you take a point in physical fatigue. Or maybe you overextended yourself, or maybe you acted a bit clumsy, or you were too open, and now you either end up hurting yourself or your opponent gets to score a free attack. There are also fumble tables for shooting and throwing actions. Next you have horde attacks. These are also called swarm attacks. This is when a game master uses many creatures at the same time, and they get a bonus because they are attacking in numbers. There are also details when you end up locked up with your opponent or entangled. Maybe it results in struggling for physical dominance, or attacking, trying to disengage, or gaining an advantage. So you have all the details. When you lose, for example, the struggle, you take a penalty to your next defensive action, or when you try to attack. There are also details on when you are outnumbered, that is not a swarm, but when you are attacked from different sides, several opponents attack you in quick succession. There are also details on potion throwing, even details on how to, for example, throw 2 potions at the same time. There's going to be more difficulty when doing that, but there is that option if the game master allows it. There are also details on fighting from a prone position, which is quite disadvantageous up close. You also have information on reaching and modifiers and how to retreat from an engagement. Well, for example, fleeing. This is going to be quite risky because you are open to an attack from behind, for example, but you could make a tactical retreat or a defensive retreat, sacrificing a bit of your combat potential, or just focusing completely on backing away while protecting yourself. There's also information on the rules of engagement. Range to melee disadvantage. This is when two enemies meet in melee range of combat. If you are armed with a shooting or ranged weapon, in this case, it's going to be more difficult for you to handle a situation in close quarters combat, but there is still that option of using, for example, your crossbow or your bow to protect yourself, but the weapon could end up being damaged. There are also details on how to inflict a shield bash. A successful heavy shield bash, for example, that is intended to stun, is able to get a heavy penalty to your opponent's defense. There's also more information on blocking with a shield, that is the logic behind it, and how to use some armor skills to improve your shield blocking. There's also a way to introduce spiritual influence in combat, that is a sort of advantage given by the gods. Your spiritual strength will allow you to make 2 rolls per combat, 2 re-rolls. That is, your faith will give you up to 2 rolls per combat, that is re-rolls in case something bad happens. This is part of the benefits of following a specific spiritual current in Demon Gate. However, those that do not follow any sort of belief or gods, they are not tied by any sort of rule or law or any effect that could take place on the followers of a particular god or philosophical current. There's also information covering what happens when you are running all the time, inside or outside of combat. Depending on your body attribute, you may have to make some checks, or you will start to quickly accumulate fatigue points. There's also information on how to handle extended tasks. Maybe you need to make several successful rolls to overcome a challenge, maybe in cooperation with other player characters, so here you have the information on how to do that. There's also information on how to wield two-handed weapons. Thanks to your great strength, you will inflict a lot of damage while doing so. Next, we have a section detailing character traits. They are gained in character creation, and they fall under flaws or values. Flaws grant you more ghost points. Now, for those of you that are not familiar with Demon Gate, well, I recommend that you watch my review of the core rulebook in the description below. But ghost points are basically points that you can use to further customize your character. So flaws grant you more ghost points when they are purchased, while values cost you ghost points because they are things to your advantage. So all of these traits allow you to better shape the background of your player character. Now I'm going to talk about a few of them. So for example, in the category of flaws, we have broke. Your character has never had much money or anything to call their own. You also have cursed. The game master gets to flip a coin, and if the answer is yes, then the game master gets to add a d6 to the target number of your attribute or skill check whenever they see fit to do so. So your checks are going to be more difficult because of this curse. You also have obese. The character is highly overweight. His or her large body does nothing good for their health, getting you a penalty at different physical checks. You also have starving. Your character begins the game with fatigue to physical and mental conditions. Now let's talk about values. You have channeled rage. The character has the natural ability to focus their anger when it comes to heavy attacks in unarmed or melee combat, so you're going to get a bonus to hit when you are attacking by spending frenzy. You also have linguist. You have a knack for learning languages faster than most. You have always been very good at it, and due to your affinity at learning languages, it costs less points to learn a language. You also have survivor. You were born a survivor. You were taught well or learned about the wilderness and what dangers awaited. Those who know it are quite aware there is little mercy out there. So this is about getting survival related skills for a lower cost. You also have way with words. You have always had a way with words for the most part. You have a way of approaching social engagements with empathic intuition at times, knowing when to be subtle, when to be cautious, or when to be stern. This one also gives you an advantage when purchasing diplomacy or word-related skills. Next, we have new class abilities to further customize your character when you create that character or when you are leveling up. So these are new additions for general characters, that is, any character class can take it. So you have new skills that anyone can take regardless of class. In other cases, only a specific class can take specific abilities, and in some other cases, only character classes belonging to a specific faction, such as fighter, wizard, rogue, spiritualist, etc., can take particular class abilities. Let me tell you about some of them. You have Call to Arms. This Call to Arms shout inspires those around you, removing any fear-based effects. You also have Coup de Grace. For all those enemies that are lower level and are not main characters, there is a chance to just end their lives when they are already heavily wounded. There is also Demonic Rite, that is used in containing a spirit or helping to bind a demonic essence, while other rituals are performed on the foul creature. You also have Forthright. The character, especially when in an argument, may use this ability to get the best of their opponent in their verbal confrontation. You also have Gambit. So the player can burn Frenzy and then flips a coin, and if he calls it, when it lands, he gets a bonus to a skill or attribute roll, but otherwise he gets a penalty. You also have Healer's Guide. You can burn Saga points in order to re-roll the healing skill check or the spell effect roll related to healing. There's also Skull Taker. The character can wear the skulls of their enemies and gain additional reputation points because of sheer intimidation. You also have Trapper. A character is quite used to making traps in the wild and has learned how to fix traps that have been broken. And these are just some of the new character abilities. There's a lot of variety for all of the characters, that is, specific classes belonging to a particular category or faction, and for all classes in general. Then we have a section detailing alchemy. Many new alchemical components and substances. Obtaining some of these rare materials could be the center or the focus of an adventure or perhaps an entire campaign. It depends on the rarity. So you have a table featuring alchemical substances, the ingredients to create such substances, the effects, the availability, and the cost. So you have things such as the Ethereal Mist. You need 5 Imago leaves, 2 Spirit Roots, and Ectoplasm, so you better get hunting those undead ethereal enemies. This gives you astral invisibility, and you also have things such as Black Powder, pretty standard. You need 3 parts niter, 1 part sulfur, and 2 parts wood. And it creates gunpowder to use in firearms, of course, especially if your character specializes in ranged combat. It would be a good idea to discover how to create your own black powder, in my opinion. Then you have Essence of Fancy. You need 3 Ikago roots, 3 fairy suckles, and 2 nickels. It gives you a bonus on all charisma checks. You also have Spirits of Vitae. You need 3 parts of alloy, 3 parts of blood iron, and 3 ametrine. This gives you regenerative properties for a number of rounds, and these are just some of the substances that you can find in this companion. There's also information on stones and crystals. Some of the stones that you come across in the game can be quite powerful after they are awakened by enchanters and those who possess the power to do so. And awakened stones are basically finely cut minerals that are imbued with magical energy, thanks to those that can tap into the raw energy of the stone to bring it to life, and this has a powerful mechanical effect on your character. That is, your character is going to get different modifiers, bonuses. So you have a complete table with different stones, their mundane focus, their chakras related to that stone, the awakened power, and the cost of the stone, and how much it costs when raw, because you could obtain this stone raw and later on awaken it in some way. So you have the Black Moonstone. This has the focus of compassion, empathy, and stress. The chakras are 2, 6, and 7. And the awakened power is that it raises your social die by a rank. You also have Cinnabar, which has the mundane focus of quickening intellect. The chakras are 1, 3, and 6, and it gives you a bonus to intelligence rolls and spell effects. There's also the Moon Crystal of the luminescent to movement focus. It affects all chakras, and it basically works as a sort of lantern. You also have the Rose Crystal, which causes affection. It affects the 4th chakra, and it gives you a bonus to seduction. So you have many crystals like a void stone, which can levitate the carrier, the worm stone shard that gives you a resistance to electrical effects. So many stones for all sorts of situations. Then you have a section detailing traps. This is going to be very useful for those that want to create trapper characters, that want to set up some ambushes, but you also have traps for the game master to challenge his players in dungeons, in any sort of dangerous site, castles, forts. So you have information on the skills required to set up traps and to deactivate them. You also have random trap tables, triggers and tricks, like for example, maybe the bait is a satchel filled with food or jewels, or maybe it's a shiny weapon to lure your prey, or maybe there is a pressure plate and stepping on this plate is what activates the trap, or maybe it's activated via a tripwire or some sort of magical effect. And the random trap table gives you so many options. Maybe it's a bolt trap or a cannon trap, a hook trap, a leg lock trap, a spring trap, maybe it's an undead grave, maybe it's a vapor trap, or maybe it's a wall scythe. So this table is quite handy because maybe your characters are going into some routes or some passageways that you didn't fully build or flesh out. So now you can determine some random traps like this immediately. There's also information on the types of gas or poison that could result from a triggered trap. Maybe it causes fear or insanity, maybe the gas causes nausea or it's quite toxic, or weakens the character that activates the trap. You have a table of magical traps such as arc lightning traps, an earthquake trap, so that's quite scary. Imagine you activate this trap and the entire room begins to shake horribly, violently. There's also a frost wave trap, the Iron Maiden, suddenly it shuts and traps you with all of those spikes. You also have information on the severity of gas or poison effects. What if you set up an Iron Maiden that has poison spikes? That would be quite deadly. So you have the severity, for example, with a slight, mild, moderate, strong. And now we move on to the Fallen Star. This is not only an adventure, this is meant to be a mini campaign with a few episodes. Now I'm going to avoid spoilers because I know there are some players that are going to be watching this video, but let me tell you, this mini campaign is quite excellent. The thing that I really liked first of this mini campaign is that there are different hooks. To insert it into an ongoing campaign or to use it as a starting scenario for a longer campaign. So you have many hooks. It avoids the pitfalls of some adventure modules out there or some mini campaigns out there that start out too railroady in my opinion. Here you have several choices on how to introduce the player characters, and this adventure contains a variety of situations. There's going to be wilderness travel, there's going to be dungeon crawl moments, a lot of social interaction as well, the deciphering of different mysteries and puzzles, and overall it feels like a small tour of the world of Koth. You really get a strong sense or like a strong grasp on how things work in the world of Koth. It has a sort of Scandinavian feel to it. This mini campaign feels a lot like the Scandinavian frontier, to put it in a way, and the player characters never know where their choices are going to take them. So this is all driven by player character choice. This is an excellent way of handling a mini campaign. It's a bit event driven or event based in some cases, but there are also some site-based moments. So this campaign not only gives you a taste of the many situations that you can live when you are experiencing Demon Gate, but there are also many different ways to take on various situations. So a mixed group of different character classes is truly going to shine. No character class is going to feel like left out or not too useful. If you have a character that specializes in social interactions, you're going to get perhaps help or negotiate a better deal concerning different quests. And if you have a character specialized completely in combat, you're going to get your moments where you are going to protect the party and crush your enemies. So a really awesome mini campaign, and perfect to connect it with existing Demon Gate modules and to use it as a starting platform for a longer campaign. And at the end of this module, you have a list of different enemies, new adversaries that appear in this mini campaign, all fully statted, and many non-player characters also fully statted that could serve as allies or enemies depending on what happens in the mini campaign, and I think it's also quite easy to use them, to take them and insert them in your own adventures, or use them as generic templates for non-player characters that you need when you improvise some encounters in other campaigns and adventures. Following that, we have a section detailing occult items. These items of the occult can be purchased or found during adventures if, as a game master, you wish to allow them to be discovered. These are all considered powerful magic items that are difficult to obtain. Now, I'm not going to give too much information on each of these relics because I think that a single one of these relics could serve as the MacGuffin or the focus for an entire adventure or even a short campaign. So you have things such as the Demon Blades, Eyahook's Eye, and the Godslayer Grimoire. There's also the Horn of Black Dreams, Nagat's Web, the Sovereign Greatsword, the Vorpal Lance, the Wraith Blade. All of these different artifacts have different effects to be used directly in combat. Some others have some effects that could affect the minds of those that are targets of their eldritch power. Some others have powerful summoning qualities. You have background information for each of these powerful artifacts and also the truth behind the rumors. And at the end of the book, you have a short story, Death Wish. I have mixed feelings about this fiction. This is going to be a spoiler-free opinion of mine, but there are some things that I really liked of this short story and some things that I didn't like too much. So what is this story about? The basic premise is that you have this very tortured man, Desmond. He lost his entire life, his family, because the powers of darkness attacked his house, and he couldn't do anything about it. He was present and he almost died, and his family died as well. So Desmond became a sort of avenger. He has this suicidal tendency. He wants to be killed in battle, but he doesn't want to die just like that. He doesn't want to give up. He wants to face powerful opponents in battle, and maybe one of them will kill him. But because of that, he's quite heroic. He's just fearless. He jumps into the fray no matter which opponent he has to fight, which sort of monster, which sort of aberration, or if there are several foes, he will gladly jump into the middle of the mob or whatever, and he will fight, and usually he wins. So Desmond has become quite the heroic figure. He is the leader of this squadron that has a sort of suicide squad feel to them. It's composed of different outlaws, people that were sentenced to death, so they were given this chance to redeem themselves, fighting battles with low odds or low chance of survival. So Desmond and his group later on in this short story are given a very dangerous mission. A mission that it's obviously an endeavor that only a suicidal maniac would undertake. And that's the basic premise of the short story. Desmond and his group need to do or attempt to do something that no other squadron could attempt because it's complete suicide. The things that I like of this adventure is generally the mood. It really shows you what the world of Koth is all about. So bleak and dreary and gloomy. It's always cloudy, the sun barely shows itself. It's also sometimes snowing and raining. There is a sort of camaraderie between the members of the squad, but you cannot fully trust them, or that's the sense that is initially communicated. Desmond's group being part of a larger force, they have interactions with other warriors, other soldiers, and I like those interactions. You can see the chain of command, the different roles and tasks within the force. There are moments where you really feel like you are traveling, moving around with that large force that has to stop an undead threat from destroying everything. I think the characters, while not exactly charismatic, are colorful enough for you to get a good picture of them. The description is nice. You can also see tangible relationships between the different warriors, and I think that the combat descriptions are really good. Some of them are superb. Now let's talk about the things that I didn't like of this short story. Demon Gate is considerably different from other more standard fantasy role-playing games, with many strange species and races. You have the Eldrin, the Bugrol, the Kuthalan, the Sharfin. So you basically have minotaurs, trolls. Those are pretty standard, but other weirder things like these sort of insect hybrid men. You have mutants, you have catfolk, you have basically what are Nephilim, that is Watcher type of characters, like with quality of angels. You also have strange beastkin that have some peculiar reptilian features to them. So with all of those fantasy species and races working together at times, like for example the Tarkanis, which are basically Skaven, that is rat men or rat folk. I wanted to see so many more species and races within the army, and they stick to humans, elves, and they mention sometimes the Batayi, which are basically mutants. So I felt it was a missed opportunity. They should have added more species and races to better display what makes the setting of Koth, of Demon Gate, unique. I also think that although the battles were quite exciting, I think sometimes there were just too many battles. That is, it's better to focus on the most important confrontations and just give some broad strokes when it comes to description of fighting. So sometimes every blow, every parry, every block, every cut is being described, and it feels like a bit too much. It's the same reason, like for example in movies and TV series, sometimes there is a sort of jump when it comes to, because you're not actually playing the game, you do not need to know everything that happens. This is a story. So it would have been better if some of the battles were just described in a more general way, like the warriors started to cut their way through their opponents, making it past this or that place, and so they cut heads and they dismembered limbs and things like that. But here sometimes they describe every individual battle, and I think that's a bit too tedious. Another thing that I didn't like too much is that the story starts out really moody, really dangerous. People are constantly dying, and you get the sense of strong grittiness of the setting. But later on, the characters just feel too powerful. I know that Desmond and his men have nothing to lose, and because of that, they are, to a certain degree, elites in combat. They are superb. More capable than other warriors, but sometimes it felt too high fantasy compared to the beginning of the story, where it feels like every attack could result in the casualty of one of the characters that you thought was going to be the main character for the rest of the short story. So later on in a huge battle, in a huge confrontation, the tone felt too epic for this short story, because in Demon Gate it is possible for a character to achieve a sort of demigod capability when it comes to any task or action. This is a game that results in very high levels of power later on, but Desmond and his forces, they do not feel like that at the beginning, so it felt like they took a massive jump in experience points from those initial encounters to the climax of the short story. So I would have preferred it if there was more consistency when it comes to the power level, how things scale up, because they start out as very capable but vulnerable warriors, and later on they just felt they look almost like fantasy superheroes. However, don't think that because of that there are not going to be more deaths and dark twists throughout the story. I also think, as a positive point, I think that this fiction teaches you how to handle a military campaign in the Demon Gate role-playing game, which is not an easy thing to do, but with this, you could even take this fiction and modify it so that it becomes a complete scenario, or 2 or 3 scenarios depending on how you want to handle the different battles. So overall, what do I think of Demon Gate, the companion? I think this is a must-have for Demon Gate game masters, and a good option for players. Let me explain why. Game masters have so many things, so many good things to take from this companion and use them even in an existing campaign. Although if you are just starting out, the life path character creation is going to be excellent to add further depth to the entire party. And if you need to replace some characters that died, it will be quite easy to allow the newly created character to use the life path process, and also use the life path process with characters that are still alive. You would just need to modify a few things so that they take advantage of different bonuses, but it's much better definitely to use it to start the entire party using the life path character creation method. All of the tables concerning the severity of different afflictions, mutation tables, non-player character tables, they're going to be useful in many different adventures and campaigns. The diseases and plagues tables, body replacements and modifications. I think this is one of my favorite parts of the book. It's well known amongst Demon Gate players that the battles can get quite dangerous. You could end up losing a limb or two. So body replacements are very useful for the game master that doesn't want to homebrew these sort of attachments. The new character classes, while not as resourceful or as powerful as the character classes in the core rulebook, like I mentioned, they are still very useful if you know where to use them and when. That is, they are more for mundane situations where a character that specializes in exploration and combat usually wouldn't attempt some things that would get them into trouble with the law enforcement of the city or with the rulers. But these new character classes that are quite subtle, such as the Emissary, the Merchant, the Prostitute, they are well suited for tasks that require discretion and deceit. But I think they will suffer a bit if they go into dangerous places, if they go into dungeons, or if they try to attack a castle or a keep. Then they aren't going to be that useful. It will be much better to infiltrate them. Perhaps a traveling merchant or a traveling prostitute or whatever gets into the place that the player characters are going to storm, then they would definitely give the player characters an advantage. So it's all about knowing how to use these character classes. The advanced combat rules really add to the different battles, to the different conflicts. The fumble tables, the character traits, the expanded rules that add more depth to the attacks and defensive options. It's very easy to integrate these rules to an existing campaign without feeling like everything was disrupted in some way. It's just an extension of what you already know from the core system. And of course, the section of alchemy, stones and crystals, and traps are also going to be great to be used against the player characters, but also to be used by player characters that specialize in those areas of expertise. The adventure, like I said, the mini campaign is awesome, excellent, and I like it how it's very easy to connect it with existing modules, or if you want to create your own modules and insert them into this mini campaign, or take the mini campaign and place it in a larger saga. The entire mini campaign is simply a great story waiting to be told. Maybe it will result in the characters' glory, in obtaining riches, in conquering their enemies, but it could also result in the characters' deaths. So this mini campaign will forcibly encourage the party of adventurers to play at their best, to use all of their specializations and their abilities. I think this is actually a difficult mini campaign. There are many options and paths to take, many ways in which you could use your spells or your specific class abilities to take on different challenges. Now, when it comes to a short story, like I told you, I have mixed opinions. Some things I would consider great, some other things fell a bit short. And of all of the different sections of the book, this short story also has a lot of errors and typos. But despite that, I also think, like I told you, it's a good example on how to run a military campaign or a military adventure in Demon Gate. Now, what did I mean when I said that this was just a good option for a player? Well, it's because many of the things here have to be approved by the game master. So if you want to use some optional combat rules, if you want to go into the life path character creation process, it depends on the type of campaign that the game master is going to be running. So this is optional because maybe you're really excited of using all of these things in a game or a campaign in which you are participating in, and maybe the game master forbids several of these things. I don't think he will object too much to the body replacements and the new character classes, but when it comes to, for example, the advanced combat rules, maybe the game master finds those rules to be a bit too simulationist, too heavy on the details. So in those situations, you wouldn't be able to use all of the content of the companion. So it's just a good choice if you are participating strictly as a player character, and you wouldn't be able to use the adventure module, the mini campaign, unless you want to become a game master, which I highly recommend. So take those things into consideration. This Demon Gate, the companion, is a must-have for Demon Gate game masters and a good option for players. Well, thank you so much for watching this review. If you have any comments or questions, please let me know. And thank you so much to those that have been sending Drive-Thru-RPG gift certificates. If anyone else wants to further support the channel, the information on how to do that will be in the description below. Once again, thank you, and see you later.